if Europe's brush with mass migration is a pile-up crash, Ireland is very much the last car in that crash. Immigration from North Africa, the Middle East, primarily the Muslim world, has proved an intractable problem. You've had some villages that have been completely transformed, where their population has doubled as a result of migrants. In Galway City, for example, a few years ago, the most popular name was Muhammad. 3 children were stabbed and an au pair. And so it was a sort of night of chaos in Dublin. The migrant centre was set on fire. And then it was set on fire again. And then it was set on fire again. Wokeness has essentially replaced the Catholic Church in Ireland. A man sent out a tweet in 2021 in 8 languages, including Somali, Urdu, French, Arabic, basically advertising Ireland to the world's refugees in the manner of an estate agent. You often hear Irish politicians saying, you know, it's wrong to say that immigration causes crime, but how do we know that? All of the other data points the other way. It's a sort of flat earth territory. There is a pattern that repeats itself in every Scandinavian country, that migrants from certain countries.
The immigration situation in Ireland is perhaps as crazy as anywhere it is in the world. Give me just a brief sort of, what's going on over there.
So it really all kicked off in November of last year, when there were riots in Dublin that really made international news. Millions of pounds worth of damage, buses were set on fire, police were attacked. And this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back of a process that had been happening for some time before then. It started after an Algerian migrant went on a stabbing spree in central Dublin. 3 children were stabbed and an au pair, and or a minder. And this then, word spread that this was a migrant who did this. We should say allegedly, because we don't know where the trial is at the moment. And this sort of spread like wildfire on social media, Telegram channels, and people took to the streets. And the police found it very difficult to get a handle on the situation. And so it was a sort of night of chaos in Dublin.
Yes, I remember that, and it was mad, and it felt like that kind of, okay, your chicken's coming home to roost kind of thing in Ireland. I've known Ireland for a long time as a country that has been seen itself as the oppressed in the oppressed versus oppressor narrative, which makes sense historically, of course, but as such has often seen maybe the British as the enemy, and the British maybe being anti-immigration, maybe the Irish wanted to be the opposite. How much has that suddenly changed, and what is that history that I'm speaking of, that sort of progressive history?
I think in Ireland there is a something bordering on a fetish for the underdog. If you listen to Irish music, the canon of Irish literature, and films, there is a celebration of the underdog, the little guy, and that's their national mythology is very much steeped in that idea. They are David to Britain's Goliath. And I think that this is one of the problems with countries that define themselves in opposition to something, a bit like Scotland. Your identity is slightly hitched to the wagon of having an enemy like this that is oppressing you, and when you lose that, you start to see people trying to find something else to fill that void. And so when you go to anti-immigration protests in Ireland, you'll often hear things like, the government is taking the Queen's shilling. Now, what the late Queen has anything to do with Ireland's immigration woes is beyond me. But there is very much that sense that a slightly conspiratorial vein actually in Ireland of, that there are higher powers that are pulling the strings, and they're not always wrong on that. And so
that's where that's started from. And I suppose it's a bit like Sweden, a bit like Canada, these countries, as you say, who maybe are in opposition to something else. I think Sweden might have seen themselves as opposition to maybe mainland Europe. They were this sort of progressive beacon of let everyone in. they have this huge country with not many people in it. So there's all this space. Let people in, there can't be a problem. We're going to show everyone what we are. What has gone on in Sweden, and how is that now happening in Ireland?
So I think Sweden is another interesting example. It, like you alluded to, it started taking to calling itself a moral superpower in the 20th century.
Arrogant.
And hubris precedes the fall, and they started to, I think, believe their own propaganda. They started to say, Sweden has a culture of exceptionalism. We can do it differently to everybody else. And so there wasn't a conflict that you could name from the 80s up until the early noughties that Sweden didn't want the largest slice of the refugee action from, whether it would be Bosnia, Somalia, Syria, Iraq. They consistently took an order of sort of magnitude higher than their neighbors worth of refugees. And it only slowly dawned on them that actually their society was becoming ghettoized. And they've got 60 no-go zones throughout the country where police have to go in, with the riot squad.
Wow.
Essentially.
Wow. So actual no-go zones.
Yes.
Because I know when like American TV, Fox started talking about no-go zones in the UK, a lot of people sort of laughed that off, although I think now that maybe isn't an issue. But 60 different places that really you and I couldn't just walk through in Sweden now.
We could, but we would, want to have travel insurance.
Wow.
It's all these things. You could do it, but why would you? Why would you risk it?
And crime, I suppose, has gone up. I think Britain doesn't keep stats of crime committed by whether they're immigrants, whether they're from different religions and things like that, which is absurd in itself. But I've heard that some of the Scandinavian countries have done, and that it has shown what people expect. Have you seen that?
I have, yes. There is a pattern that repeats itself in every Scandinavian country that collects this data. Finland, Sweden, and Norway, that migrants from certain countries, the acronym for these countries is MENAPT, which is the Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, and Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And those migrants tend to be vastly overrepresented in violent crime. And if you dig into the different types of crime, it's the figures become even more stark. So in Sweden, I think there's a brilliant economist called Tino Sanandaji, a slightly mischievous Iranian economist who was studying this, basically the only person in Sweden studying this. And he found that MENAPT migrants are overrepresented in burglaries by a factor of 4 relative to the native Swedish population, and 5 times more likely to rape someone than the native Swedish population.
So this is the hypocrisy here, the psychological hypocrisy of people who want to be kind, always take refugees, which is a nice thing to do. Let's not forget that, of course, people fleeing from wars, it is nice when another country offers them sanctuary. However, it's not really being kind to the women who are being raped systematically by these people coming over right now. In fact, it's the most horrific thing that can be done. This is now happening in Ireland. It makes sense. Ireland's a beautiful country. It's also a country with, I think, a lot of space. Is that right? It's quite, I looked at the map the other day. My whole life, I've gone through thinking Ireland and Northern Ireland together was this little sort of circle next to the triangle of Britain. And I came to realize that when you get to sort of Belfast, you're up at the northern end of England. And if you're at the southern end of Ireland, it's basically, it's not as big as England, is it? But it's not that much smaller for land, but much smaller for population.
Yeah, Ireland is one of the least densely populated countries in Europe. It's also one of the few countries where its population is drastically lower today than it was in the mid-19th century. Wow. Before the famine, there were around 8 million people in Ireland. There's currently 5.
Wow.
And that's been slowly ticking up from it collapsed to about 2 million people 20 or 30 years ago. So it's not so much an issue of space necessarily in terms of green belt land that could be built on. It's more that the migrants the migrants that come in, they tend to sort of be concentrated in cities, in towns, in places where you can radically alter a demographic of, say, a town of 5,000 in Roscrea, where I've spent some time now. 1,000 of those are migrants. And so that's 20% increase in a couple of years of many people who don't speak English very well, are going to find it very difficult to assimilate into that community. And so it's we think about these things in terms of a national picture, but how it actually manifests to the person on the ground who's living with it is much more local. And so you've had some villages that have been completely transformed, where their population has doubled as a result of migrants. And then you have some of the maybe more well-heeled parts of Dublin, which have until very recently gotten away unscathed. And that's why I think you have often a different picture emerging of how people view the situation across the country.
That's interesting about the nicer places of Dublin, or the posher places, suddenly starting to be affected by this, because there's that, I suppose it's a myth that, like Les Mis, it's always the working classes who rise up, and it tends to actually be the middle classes. When the middle classes are bothered by something, when suddenly their child can't go to the school that they wanted to because of something or other, that's when political change starts to take place. And I suppose, would you say that's coincided, it's finally affected those people, and that's coincided with this being brought to wider attention, the issue in Ireland?
Yes, I think a few things happened. One, it was very easy to villainize the people who were rioting last November, because, to be honest, a lot of them were thugs, and it was senseless violence and opportunism. They were looting stores, the sort of things not too dissimilar from what we saw in the London riots. But then you started to see rural protests of grannies, mums, daughters, community people that were really didn't have a political bone in their body, suddenly becoming very politicized on this one issue. And, I was part of a press gang that went to speak to those people, and it was very difficult to see any far right or, people with nefarious beliefs about, migrants and things like that. It was just locals concerned about their community and the fabric of their society was changing so fast. So I think that was a real turning point in March, when you saw some of those more rural protests come to the fore. And then in December of last year, the government ran out of accommodation. And so they had to start presenting the migrants that they'd invited in such great numbers with tents and sleeping bags, and say, sorry, but we haven't got anywhere to house you. And so these asylum seekers started camping along, among other places, Dublin's Grand Canal, which is where the offices, the headquarters of many American tech firms like Facebook, Twitter, etc., are located. And so this is very embarrassing for Dublin as an international capital of commerce and tech. And you saw like vast Georgian roads that were some of the capital's finest streets becoming suddenly very claustrophobic. You'd have to step around people to get around these tents. It almost reminded me of the film Don't Look Up, where the meteorite's coming to Earth and everybody just says, don't look up. It's don't look down. That's the sort of measure of your political correctness, is the ability not to see what is right in front of you. And sometimes step in it, because there were no toilets in those shanty towns, essentially.
Gosh, yeah, I saw in your documentary for the Telegraph on YouTube, which was brilliant. You see what seems to be feces or something, and in one of the tents, I don't know if it's just mud, but the conditions they're living in, and it does recall San Francisco. I mean, you'd speak of the tech hub in that respect. This place that was just the bright lights, and everybody was so wonderful and quite smug, I would say, and self-righteous. And suddenly they've got this place where everybody's leaving and going to Texas or wherever, because it's just fallen apart. And unfortunately, I mean, is that looking like the future for Dublin or for Ireland?
I don't think they have a Texas, so they're stuck with the country.
Texas is the Texas. Maybe they could, there's a lot of Irish immigration to America.
That's true. And if you speak to young Irish people, they'll be going to Australia or the Arab Emirates because housing is so expensive in Ireland, and they get paid a lot more when they go there. I think that migration is a kind of nexus issue. It unites all of the other issues in terms of, schools availability, hospitals, property the rental market, labor, wage prices. And so I think that's going to just keep the pressure on all of those factors that are already making Ireland a sort of emigrant country as well.
What's the political situation? So for those outside of Ireland, who's in charge? What are their beliefs, and why are they letting in so many refugees and immigrants?
So the current Irish government has had various permutations over the last 6 or 7 years, but really a key figure in the whole immigration saga has been Leo Varadkar, who is the former Taoiseach, now replaced by Simon Harris. He seemed very keen on the idea that, Ireland needed to be this sort of bastion of compassion towards the world's refugees. His government minister for integration and housing, a man called Roderick O'Gorman, sent out a tweet in 2021 in 8 languages, including Somali, Urdu, French, Arabic, basically advertising Ireland to the world's refugees in the manner of an estate agent. He offered them own door accommodation. So you don't have to be in a flat, we'll give you your own front door. And this is, I think that speaks to for them, it wasn't a sort of obligation that Ireland would fulfill out of, the goodness of their heart. It was something that they were actively elated by. They were enthusiastic about Ireland taking in more refugees. And that's an ideological position that I don't think, if you were to poll the Irish public, especially after seeing the consequences, that they would have been on board with.
So this was maybe purely ideological. It's just some ideologues in charge who thought we're doing what's right by doing exactly not what our constituents want.
I think a lot of Irish society was taken in by the rhetoric. The government were coming at it from a position of, Ireland doesn't have an army. Ireland doesn't have really a meaningful contribution to international affairs beyond what it sees as, its kind of moral contribution or its cultural contribution, these very soft attributes. And so, at the start of the Ukraine war, Ireland was very keen to flex its muscles to say, okay, we are going to pull our weight in fighting the tyrant of the 21st century, Vladimir Putin. And we're going to stick it to him by inviting all of these Ukrainian refugees. They took one of the highest relative amounts of Ukrainian refugees in Europe. But again, this was it seems to me, looking from the outside in, a policy that was felt good, but that wasn't thought through. And this is a consistent pattern with the Irish government. They invited all these Ukrainians. They gave them, 230 euros a month to live off, and very generous payment. And then they took in too many. They had to slash the payment by to 40 euros or something.
Oh wow, and that's a big slash.
Big slash. And they advertised Ireland to asylum seekers, and then when they had to start handing out tents and sleeping bags, and they were a little bit embarrassed about that, they then had to send out another message 2 years later saying, sorry guys, we're full. And so they have a very short time horizon in how they consider the second and third order effects of what feels good today.
Gosh, that's I suppose a lesson for everyone. I mean, individually, isn't it, as well? I saw a great graph on Twitter about that, like people who want to do things that make them feel good in the moments and how their life tends to go. And it was this great little graph that showed like, oh, you get a peak because you're happy, but then it goes down and up and down and up and down gradually down because you need those peaks more and more. And then people who make more sensible, rational, long-term decisions, they just sort of more straight, and gradually their lives tend to get better. And I wonder if I can find that graph. It was great. But I think that applies obviously on a national level. If you think things through and you don't just jump into doing these ideological decisions that make you feel good. It seems that things are changing. I mean, the feeling in Ireland, of course. And one thing that struck me in your documentary was that they're bringing people in overnight. Is that a usual thing to do in countries, to bring in refugees overnight so no one sees them? Is that what's going on? It seems incredibly, just absolutely bizarre.
So what usually happens is, say a small town like Roscrea will be given 24 hours notice that their hotel, the only hotel in the town as it happens, is being essentially taken over to house migrants, and they've got no recourse to complain about this. The hotel owner is in a seasonal business. Why, he's going to snatch the government's arm off if they offer him 2 years at a higher going rate than what he's going to earn in, so it's actually more lucrative in many cases to house refugees than hotel guests in Ireland.
Wow.
And so this is a great deal for the landlord. The community, like I say, is given 24 hours notice. Sometimes they will come out and protest. And so the government has tended to bus in the migrants at night, where they can, deposit them in the hotel with relatively little fuss. And so the communities then have started, like in Roscrea or Coolock, they've started doing these overnight protests where they'll sit out and they'll have somebody on guard outside the venue for days or weeks at a time. And the Irish government has now had to start bringing a kind of gendarmerie style police force.
Wow.
With, essentially in riot gear to safely leave the migrants in the hotel.
Bloody hell. And there's, just from the human side there, as much as I think this is a terrible political decision, these are individuals who are on these buses, and I'm just trying to think about how it must feel for them. It was sort of like, you can imagine one of these movies where you're on the bus and outside there are people maybe who don't like you and they're throwing rocks at you, and you just want safety. You finally arrived in this place you've been promised was the place you can finally live and have an amazing life, and the locals are throwing things at you and all of these kinds of things, which I understand that side as well. They don't want it. It's ruining their country. It's ruining their safety. It's ruining the safety of their children because of the stats you've given about, was it MENAP, the MENAP? Menapt,
yeah.
Those peoples, but at the same time, it's just an absolute mess on all sides.
Well, I would say that the majority of the protests I've seen have been very peaceful and respectable, and the Irish people, on the whole, don't have a problem with the migrants or the refugees. They have a problem with the government taking away cherished community hubs and seeming to do the whole, seeming to import unprecedented numbers of people into the country in a cat-handed way that's upturning their lives. And so I there are some that have turned violent, but that tends to be aimed at the police. I haven't seen migrants being abused. There have been some instances, of course, but I don't think that's the overall tenor of these protests. And as for the migrants on the bus, yes, it's these poor souls have no doubt come from terrible circumstances. I've spoken to many of them. Some of them have fled the Taliban in Afghanistan. Some of them have come from Nigeria and Boko Haram. It's just a question of, is Ireland the right place for these people to start new lives? And does Ireland have an unlimited capacity to make this sort of steady flow of unfortunate people around the world a new normal? And many people don't think so.
I saw another video on YouTube. It was some demographer, I think, who was explaining how you're not really doing much good for the world by allowing the levels of immigration that they currently have in America, for example. He had these like gumballs or whatever I don't know what they're called, like just little marbles, or maybe it's just marbles. And he was saying, this is what you're taking from the world you're trying to help. And it was like one little thing, and there's like 1 billion of these things. And in that year, that thing's now just multiplied. So you're not doing the good you think you're doing. It's not helping anyone, and it's ruining the lives of the working class already in those countries. One of the things that struck me in the documentary, something I came to realize, was the word unfettered. Everybody's using that word, unfettered. It's like the word of the year because of immigration, unfettered. And because of that, I've always understood the word unfettered, or I started to understand it as meaning sort of unchecked, but it doesn't actually mean that. I looked it up in the dictionary. It just means unrestrained or uninhibited. So we're using a word wrong. I just wanted to make that point. Everybody's saying, it is unfettered in that sense, but I think they're trying to say unchecked, aren't they?
Many people complain about unvetted male migrants in Ireland.
I think that's where the words come from, because of unvetted.
Yes. It might be a sort of hocus pocus thing where, something that's originally said has been
unfettered has come to mean unvetted.
Yes. And to be honest, the two both apply.
Yeah, so unfettered and unvetted.
Yeah.
I feel like a rapper. Well, this would be a good sort of line in a song, wouldn't it?
Shall I riff back? Shall we?
Unfettered, unvetted. If we could think of some other good rhymes.
Unrequited. I forced that a bit.
Unrequited love. If you were a rapper, you could do that.
Ireland's unrequited immigration love affair.
Yeah. Okay, that's our rap. That's really good. But look, they were saying they feel unsafe. They are worried about their children, and it seems they have reason to worry. I mean, is this going to get worse, this situation, in the coming years?
I would like to say that I don't want to overstate the case of that there is nothing in Ireland like there is in Sweden. Ireland is if Europe's brush with mass migration is a pile-up crash, Ireland is very much the last car in that crash.
God. Okay.
And so the two are not comparable. But there's no no-go zones. There's no mass criminality among migrants that we know of yet, although the government, like ours, do not collect the statistics.
That's so frustrating.
They're very reluctant to even comment on it. So it's we simply don't know. We don't know if I would be very surprised if a pattern that's playing out across Europe with a certain groups having a higher propensity for violent crime. If Ireland is somehow an exception, then that's great. But I very much doubt it.
To not collect the crime data feels like a crime in itself. It feels like one of the most irresponsible things you can do, which is bring people from totally different cultures. And it's not a race issue, because I think most of us can agree we're fundamentally of the idea that anybody from any race, skin color, anything like that is the same. If you'd been adopted and you grew up in Ireland or whatever, but bringing people in from different cultures. I mean, there's that idea, isn't there, that there's no better culture than any other culture and all cultures are of equal value, which is just nonsense when you've got cultures such as that of the Taliban going on. But you've got people coming from different cultures, and they're coming into this country, and we know from Europe, from Sweden and Denmark, about the crime statistics, and yet they are choosing not to do that because I suppose it would show their own stupidity in allowing them in.
Yes, I think that there's a sense that to even mention immigration and crime in the same sentence is a crime in itself, is a kind of thought crime. You often hear Irish politicians saying, it's wrong to compare, say that immigration causes crime. But how do we know that? All of the other data points the other way. So it's very much an article of faith amongst Ireland's anointed elite, where they, that meme where the guy stands up and he says his heretical view. It's something that they say, but that they have no foundation for saying. It's a sort of flat Earth territory.
Yeah, it seems to be that it's extraordinary, really. And also a point that on the other side of it, just regarding immigration, is we so often as you say, it's something you're not allowed to say. It's a sacred term, immigration, or it's a thought-terminating cliche. Oh, you must be a dog whistling racist or something. But there are places where Brits, for example, and maybe the Irish do as well, I don't know, go and completely make it their own and ruin it. And everybody's happy to talk about that. I mean, the south of Spain, right? It just ruined culturally ruined. And I'd be surprised if it didn't also, the Brits going there, affect their crime rates. I have no idea. I have no real basis for saying that, except for it's a place to go and be rowdy and drink a lot. And you speak to Spanish people and they go, bloody hell, those English. And that's what, if you allow enough people quickly enough to go and establish their own place, why would they integrate with the locals? How many English in the south of Spain actually learn Spanish and eat paella every day? Or maybe they do eat paella because it's nice, but actually get involved in Spanish customs and contribute to the Spanish way of life. It just doesn't. So people are so happy to say that. It's the same with when you say to people, gosh, a friend of mine does this actually because they're from Colombia, they live in England, and they get frustrated because English people are always being so woke and so over the top. Oh, immigration's great, and isn't it always wonderful? And if you don't have to learn the language when you come here. So my friend starts by saying, oh God, there's all these English people who come to Colombia and they don't even learn the language. And so the woke people go, oh, that's awful. Oh, how can that be? Oh, that's awful for you guys. And they go, yeah, I guess it's like immigrants who come to England and don't learn the language. And then they're in a difficult place. And they go, oh my God, what do I say? So anyway, so now it seems in Ireland, people are sort of getting on board with this, but there have been arson attacks, right? That's going on across the country. There was, of course, you spoke about that time, was it November? They burned a refugee hotel. So it's heating up.
There's been a spate of 20 or 30 arson attacks in Ireland over the last year, with very few arrests made. There's a sense that this is kind of vigilante stuff. It's not necessarily centrally coordinated. It's just people are going and, for example, there's a factory in a place called Coolock in North Dublin, which would be quite a rough area. That had a factory which was meant to house, I think, over 1,000 migrants. The people of Coolock staged a 3-month-long protest, trying to bend the government's ear. The government didn't listen. And there was a massive clash between the police and the protesters. It settled down, and then what happened? The migrant centre was set on fire, the former factory, and then it was set on fire again, and then it was set on fire again. And so there, I mean, as tactics go, I mean, the government are going to find it very difficult to insure that building, and it would probably be irresponsible of them to put the migrants in a destination where they know that they're going to be under threat. And so, that does seem to be the tactics of grassroots anti-immigration criminals in Ireland, which I think you're going to see a lot more of.
Which again is really sad because again you've got these people who finally found their way to this place. Maybe they have dreams and aspirations, and they're having their home burned by people who don't want them there. At the same time, those people are feeling they've exhausted every avenue of trying to make the government listen and understand they didn't want this. People in your documentary are saying there are gangs of people, and that particular woman seemed very reasonable. She said, "Look, if these were white people, I'd be worried as well. If you've got gangs of 20 or 30 in hoods and things, that's very concerning for us walking with our children, going home at night in places that have long been known as very safe and very nice. And now you've got this going on. What is the situation now in Ireland with regards to statistics, demographically? What do we know? What percentage roughly? I mean, it's changing every day, of course, of Ireland's population is non-native born.
Roughly 20%.
Okay.
Which is, 30 years ago would have been negligible. So that's a massive change. It took Britain 60, 70 years to get to a similar spot. And we're still not as diverse as that. And so there's a massive change in Ireland. I think the white Irish population is now 77%.
Okay.
And you're starting to see intimations of what this really means. In Galway City, for example, a few years ago, the most popular name was Mohammed.
Right, which has long been the case in the UK, I think.
Yes. And so it's, I mean, you have many Brazilians. Most of the immigration in Ireland has been from the Slavic countries in the 2000s and on, and over 100,000 Poles, Lithuanians. That was a difficult wave to absorb, but at least there was some cultural similarities between formerly Catholic Ireland, Catholic Poland. It's very much the type of immigration now that is what Europe has had so many issues with, is immigration from North Africa, the Middle East, and primarily the Muslim world has proved an intractable problem for every European country that has experimented with this at scale, at pace, and if Ireland is the exception, then we'll.
It won't be, and that's that. I mean, that Hitchens quote, which I can't remember, something about it's you let the barbarians in. It's never the barbarians just knocking down the gate. It's you let them in, and that's how it happens. And it is happening that way, and people are just closing their eyes and ears to it. And I suppose it's a particular shame with Ireland. Look, if I went to Turkey, I suppose I would like, and I have been to Turkey, and I love going to Istanbul and seeing this really Turkish traditional culture that hasn't been in any sense diluted. The same, I'm sure, would be true of Morocco. I'd love to go there, and Algeria, and see all of these wonderful historic places, and the culture, and see what they're like, and all of those things. And Ireland, while, as you say, it doesn't have a huge political import on the world scale, it culturally does. I mean, culturally and historically, wow, Ireland, everyone's fascinated by Ireland and all the stories and all the tales. And there's something even about singers. You listen to Damien Rice and you go, bloody hell, there's something about just the fact that he's Irish and he's got something there. It's a remarkable thing. And I suppose that is another thing that is just simply, that's going to be lost now.
Yeah, I think when you import a large number of people from a different culture into your own, there's often lots of things written into the small print of that aren't immediately apparent. And one of them is that in the society that we have, that often comes with social re-engineering programs of one kind or another, where you want to just make the population a bit more sensitive to the racial etiquette of race relations. And so Ireland has appointed a race Tsar, who is a woman that seems to find racism as a sort of miasmic force that's everywhere and nowhere at once. And
is that the name of her role?
She's the race envoy, or it's something very pompous, and
I hate these people, but go on.
And so I've no love lost with me either, but I read recently that she accused a Galway hotel publicly of racism after she was served a Ribena instead of a glass of red wine.
Oh, so is she black or something?
Yes.
Okay, and they gave a Ribena to screw with her for something.
I don't know, but I very much doubt it.
The thing is, she's now in a job where she has to keep finding racism, otherwise she doesn't.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
The supply needs to meet the demand, and so there's little cultural affronts like that, which the Irish people are paying essentially to be re-educated by often quacks with a PhD in race studies.
How is wokeness in Ireland?
Wokeness has essentially replaced the Catholic Church as the dominant sort of form of ethics in Ireland.
Shit.
Especially in the cities, in the cosmopolitan parts of Ireland, there's a lot of it.
Okay. Is it one of the wokest countries in the world? Is it one of those?
I'd say it's up there. It's not quite Canada, but it's hot. It's in hot pursuit.
Yeah, it's these countries, Canada. I've heard Iceland. Someone I was going to interview was telling me Iceland. He's from Iceland. He said it's now the wokest country in the world. These large countries, progressive, haven't necessarily had the big. They weren't big on the world stage. They wanted to be, as you were saying about Sweden. What was it? The big. What were they? They were going to be
The moral superpower.
Yeah, everybody's sort of vying for that position. If you're not going to be a political or economic superpower, let's all vie. It works with the status game as well. I always talk about Will Storr's status game, that there's 3 types of status that we all try to get on an individual level. The best one would be success, because evolutionarily, if you were successful and you made a fire or whatever, you'd be given more of the food and shelter because you're needed, you're successful. So we're incentivized to be successful, but not everybody can be. So if you're not able to be successful, whether that's as an individual or on the world stage, there are 2 other options for you. One is to be dominant. A lot of men do this. It's sort of the toxic masculinity, they might call it. But women do it as well, of course. And countries do it. They're dominant. They haven't maybe done that much successfully economically, but they want to dominate in other ways. The other way is virtue. By if you could show your tribe that you were nice and you were sharing things, they would share things with you. So it does feel like the macro equivalent of that. And on the world stage is countries that couldn't have the same economic impact as others, but are now going to be, okay, we're going to be the moral superior virtue signalers. And so that's what sort of woke stuff are we seeing in Ireland?
Yeah, that's very interesting. You can see that with countries around the world. With Ireland, you get... For example, Leo Varadkar, almost berated the Irish Parliament a few years ago about the shocking whiteness of the Irish civil service and people in Irish public life. And it was kind of similar to that video of Humza Yousaf doing the same, but slightly less gung-ho. And, he said... The Department of Education is mostly white. This is mostly white. That's mostly white. And, he said, well, this doesn't reflect Irish society. And, some people might say, well, you're slightly rigging the deck there, because you're creating a society that then creates the demand for these kind of things. Or justifies these kind of social re-engineering projects. And so
and means that though that first generation, many of whom won't even speak the language, are expected to hold high positions. It's one of the issues when Humza Yousaf, whenever these people talk about this, why isn't the demographic reflected in high positions, the minister of police? I mean, how many people can go to a new country, start a new life, and they're the minister of police immediately? It takes generations for different people. Really, we should be looking at the demographics of a country, how it was 30, 40 years ago, if we're going to look at people who are at the top. And even then, you're still talking about a first generation person. I mean, you don't have the same contacts, you don't have the same kinds of hooks in a country. It takes generations.
It's also a very unedifying way to sort of culture to instill a newly arrived Irish people. If you're a Nigerian arriving in Ireland and you see the leader of the country telling you you're entitled to power and prestige and position, and the reason you're not having it, that we haven't accorded you what's your due, is racism or soft prejudice, and the Irish people just need to be shaken out of this. That's not, to my mind, a great recipe for healthy inter-ethnic and intercultural relations. I think
because we're told the opposite when we go somewhere as Brits, for example. When I lived in South America, I mean, you're always told don't sort of tread on things or don't get in the way of things because it's their way of life, and if you do, you're messing with their culture. Don't expect things. I tried to work as a journalist in these countries, and it wasn't easy to do, because why do they want some English guy? They've got someone homegrown who they can have, and I was never told, but you have a right. And why aren't there enough English people in these? Well, why should there be? And there are a lot of English people living in South America, but why should they be prioritized above the local people?
Yeah, I mean, if you went to Japan and started kicking up a fuss that you weren't getting on quick enough in journalism in Japan, I suspect your mates might just tell you to rein it in or get a grip. Yeah. But this is precisely the ethic that we are spreading and instilling in foreign people who are coming to our countries. And you're starting to see certain groups are, displaying a tremendous sort of ethnically based collective narcissism of, this sense of we are entitled to things by virtue of our skin color or by virtue of, our culture or our chromosomes. And if you don't give it to us, we're going to, weaponize language in a way that is going to make your life very difficult.
What about the sort of LGBT stuff? And because it tends to be the omni cause, it all comes hand in hand, doesn't it? So what's that like in Ireland?
Very, very strong. If you go to Dublin Airport, you are under no illusions about the regime, the regime's affinities for that sort of stuff. There's massive LGBT flags, everywhere you go. There's LGBT flags, and it's. Roderick O'Gorman, the minister I mentioned earlier, who is really central to a lot of this, these problems that they're having with immigration, was, I think, on a march with Peter Tatchell, the LGBT activist, and so the government is full throttle behind all of that, in a way that. Again, is a little bit, I'd say overbearing. Ireland had a Catholic past where, the gay people were definitely marginalized. They wouldn't speak about it to their friends or family. It would definitely be a stigma and a shame attached to that. And it's good that that's not the case anymore. But the pendulum's kind of swung the other way, where they've been trying to almost overcompensate for that past at breakneck speed. It's not quite, the trans drag queen hour in primary schools that we're seeing in America or in Canada. It's not quite there, but they're not too far off.
You see, again, there's the microcosm is the individual who leaves a cult, and I've seen it time and time again. They leave Hasidic Judaism, Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever it might be, and go super woke, super crazy. The hair, like, it's almost like their head immediately turns blue.
It's like they have a cult-shaped hole in their life.
Yeah, that's it. And also because they are rebelling against what they knew, and what they knew tends to be in all of those factions homophobic. So they think, oh, well, anyone who embraces gay people, as one should, then has to celebrate the opposite, and then that becomes their religion. That's the cult-shaped hole, as you say. The hair just turns blue. Has anyone looked into this? I mean, we look into Big Pharma and stuff, but who's producing blue hair dye? Because, they must be making a fortune. The blue hair dye people.
I think the blue hair has been around for a little while. The nihilists in Russia in the late 19th century used to dye their hair blue, I believe. And
interesting.
Wear these spooky John Lennon glasses. So I think there's definitely an interesting study to be done on the fashion of subversion or revolution.
Yeah, the blue. Well, they're earning a fortune. So and honestly, that must be. I mean, I'm being facetious, but they must have meetings and they must go, "Oh, this is good. Let's make more of the blue. That's really selling. Make sure we have it in Ireland and Canada and certain parts of London that are fashionable."
It was the Smurf film studios that repurposed this.
Maybe they're behind this, the Smurfs. It's an unbelievable weird thing going on. One of the things you told me the other night, which actually surprised me, there's obviously some pushback. And so Ireland, I've always known, as a Jew myself, as a place that has a high percentage of anti-Semitic feeling compared to maybe other countries. Often whenever I met other Irish journalists, or not other, I'm not one, but just Irish journalists and Irish people, when they heard my name, Gold, there would be a comment. There'd be a little, oh, right, oh, Israel, eh? And all that stuff. Very anti-Israel. But you told me something about Eurovision the other day that suggested that, and by the way, the reason that's relevant is because it often tends to go hand in hand with wokeness. It's sort of the anti-woke tend to be pro-Israel, the woke tend to be. So what was it that you were telling me the other night?
So Ireland was won the popular vote in Israel won the popular vote in Eurovision in Ireland, which many people were quite surprised to see. I don't think they won the judges' vote, but
of course not. That's you couldn't.
There you go. So some people said there might be a silent majority actually who are quite supportive of Israel, because people tend to that's quite a politicized show, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. No one's judging the music, are they? They'd all fail.
Well, there you go.
It's terrible. I think it is all like, which country do I like? All the Scandinavian countries vote for each other.
Yes, it's nepotism par excellence.
Yeah.
So
Britain always loses. Ireland also always loses, actually. They're both sort of at the bottom. Whenever I used to, I watched it a few times over. Maybe that's not true anymore. But Israel obviously doesn't get many votes from many countries. So interesting, the popular vote, that would suggest maybe that it is, the people I've met who are Irish, obviously in journalistic circles, are going to be that kind of elite, liberal elite, woke kind of thing. And so maybe we've got those riots now against immigration, and you've got this secret pro-Israel stance potentially. There's a pushback going on. Could things change in Ireland?
I'm not very optimistic about the prospect for a sort of major shift in Irish politics. They have a few problems. One is that their only populist party, Sinn Féin, has sort of dropped the nationalism and kept the socialism. And they would have been the obvious party for many of the anti-immigration voters. Their name says it on the tin, ourselves alone. But now you can barely catch Mary Lou McDonald outside of a mosque or going to various multicultural functions and saying, this is the new Ireland, isn't it great? And so those voters have become homeless, essentially. And there are three political parties in Ireland: Fianna Fáil, which is sort of Fine Gael, and Sinn Féin, and they essentially dominate the landscape. There isn't much room for a sort of breakaway party, and if there aren't necessarily credible candidates to take it forward. And so you've got this very live grassroots populist discontent in Ireland, but it's unusual in Europe in that it doesn't have a vessel to actually translate that into political change. And a part of that is this, I was speaking to an Irish friend the other day. It's an interesting dynamic where the nationalist cohort in Ireland obviously are quite Anglophobic. Whereas the sort of conservative intellectual elite in Ireland are often quite pro-England and have a sort of broader view of our shared history. And so there's a slight mismatch really between that chunk of voters and their potential leaders. And this is just one of the quirks of politics on the in the frontier, when you have a country like Ireland who very much has defined itself in opposition to Britain. There's not the same laws of political gravity as we might have in our country.
So a bleak outlook. And I'm thinking also about Eurovision, that they were the ones that they were nuts. Did you see that? Though the Irish ones, they said they were queer.
Yes.
But they were just straight. There was a straight couple.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I just can't. That was if anyone's not seen them. They were very anti-Israel as well. That was a big thing for. They're supposed to go and sing a song. That's what they're supposed to do. But if anyone hasn't seen them, look up the Irish Eurovision, because they are just awful and homophobic. Deeply homophobic, to suggest that they're somehow queer when it's just a straight couple. What a horrible couple of people.
Apart from anything else, if I was queer, I think I'd be mortified that my ambassador was dressed up like Marilyn Manson and had sharpened teeth.
What's that got to do with being gay? The dignity of a homosexual relationship or whatever it might be, the right to marry somebody in a reciprocated relationship. I just, and that's what they think that is.
Well, this is the thing that I think we've sort of conflated, or the two things of identity and politics have been sort of elided. Where if you're black, this is your politics, and if you don't toe that line, then you're a coconut or a you saw it with Kanye West. People said, "Oh, he's not black." Or you see it with gay people. It's like, and again, this comes back, I suppose, to where the theme of your podcast. It's there's no hatred like that for the apostate, for somebody who is supposed to be one of ours and leaves the tribe. And I think this is one of the most toxic aspects of the whole identity politics phenomenon. Is these are your immutable characteristics, and therefore this is what you think on every issue. Like, what a staggering
display of bigotry.
Yes.
Bloody hell. It reminds me of, I mean, again, to mention Hitchens, as always seems to happen in every conversation ever nowadays between anyone, beware identity politics, beware this word identity, because that was something he was very concerned with at the time.
I think he also said it was always the stupid, the dull, and the boring, and the selfish who thought that identity politics would be their big win.
Well, that makes sense, and he called it double accounting, which was what he did, which was to try and be on both sides of things. I suppose we all want to try and do that to some extent. I know you've got a documentary which will probably come out around the week we put this out. We'll try and put it out about the same time. Where will people be able to get that, and give me a brief outline?
So it will be a new Substack page called Outpost Studios, and you'll see it in fine websites, pages everywhere. And I decided to go to Israel to make a film, really because I was talking to a friend, and she said that, we've seen documentaries in Gaza, we've seen what happened with the October 7th raids, but we haven't seen Israel's war, as it were. What does the war look like from Jerusalem, from the north, where towns have been evacuated, from across the breadth of the country, from a variety of different people and voices. Because there's often a sort of the Israeli government and then Israeli public opinion seem to have drowned out the voices of actual Israelis, which you don't hear from very often. And so I just decided to travel around the country and hear it from the horse's mouth of why do they think this war? Why do they think this war is worth fighting? And do they view it in the same terms as their government? What do they think of the international criticism that they get? And what ultimately do they see as the end goal?
It's fascinating. Well, and I bet people watching now won't even know that, as you mentioned, I don't know how many thousands it is. It's something like 70,000. Is it people who've been Israelis displaced from the north of Israel due to Hezbollah's constant attacks, and that's been going on for months and months and months. No one even knows about it. It's just all it said is Israel genocide, and no one wants to talk about Israeli people being displaced.
Where's their right to return?
Yeah,
is the overused phrase.
Yeah. Well, that now they're refugees in their own country. That doesn't mean that it's not sad for Palestinians who are also in an awful state right now. Who is a heretic you admire?
Sophie Scholl.
Tell me about her.
She was part of a movement in Germany during the 1940s student movement called the White Rose, which printed leaflets and essays against the Nazis. And she was handing out these leaflets one day in her university in Munich, and the janitor saw what she was doing and reported her to the Gestapo, who then swooped in on her and her brother Hans and some of the other members of their group and brought them in for interrogation, in which she displayed for an 18-year-old girl a remarkable stoicism and equanimity in the face of certain death. She went before a rather sort of cretinous Nazi judge called Roland Freisler, who was the sort of Savonarola of the Third Reich. He was the sort of Grand Inquisitor. And again, sort of remarkably composed, and she was beheaded in a rather medieval fashion. And she never took anything back. She never pleaded for mercy. She she died on her shield. And
Wow.
yeah.
What an amazing heretic. Thank you so much for sharing that. People, please go check out Michael Murphy on Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter. See that the documentary's on firstly, the Telegraph one, that was the Irish one I'm talking about. You just type that in. That's how I found it. It's easy. Islands, Michael Murphy, Telegraph. And his Israel one, the Substack, will have a link in the description. So go check that out. Hit the like button. Keep watching this show. Just watch the show. It's here. Watch it.